Lisa Rubel from Quilty Zest, and today I'm going to walk you through all three of the project options in Sit and Sew Fabric's Stars and Stripes kit. You can use the pre-cut pieces in this kit to make three different projects, either a wall hanging, a table runner, or 4 placemats. And they all use the same blocks, it's just about how you put those blocks together. It's a great patriotic project to have for all of the summer holidays, and it will look wonderful on your table anytime you want to have a little red, white, and blue bling. This is a great project to have for all of our patriotic summer holidays, and it will look wonderful on your table anytime you want to add a little red, white, and blue pizzazz to your eating area. So let's get started. So the Stars and Stripes kit comes with all of the pre-cut pieces you need to make any of these three projects. Let's take a look. We've got the stars. We've got white and red pre-cut strips and the blue squares that the stars will go onto. There's also backing fabric and binding fabric. So before we get started, you'll want to decide which of the three projects you're going to make, because then you'll know how many blocks you need to make. Now, if you do choose to make the placemats, you'll use up all of the pieces that come with this kit, because we'll be making 4 matching placemats. But if you make either the wall hanging or the table runner, you'll have leftover pieces that you can work into another project or just sew together and make a smaller red, white, and blue sewing project. But decide which project you're going to make so you know how many blocks you need to sew. So I'm going to start out by making my star blocks. And for each star block, you will need one of your pre-cut blue squares and one of your pre-cut stars. Now, I'm going to be using spray baste to attach my star to my fabric square. And so what you'll want to do is protect your cutting surface, your table, whatever you're working on. So I've got a piece of plastic down and then a piece of cardboard, and that way when I spray I don't have to worry about getting it onto my cutting mat. Before I do the spraying, what I'm going to do is take my blue square, press it in half in one direction, and just lightly press that center point. And then do the same thing in the other direction. And by doing this, it allows me to see where the center of my square is. You can see it's a real faint pressed line, so that after I spray my star, when I go to put it on, it's easier for me to tell that I've got my star centered on that square. Okay, so I'm going to move my square over to my ironing board. I'm going to set my star down and lightly spray the back of it with basting spray. And then pick it up and position it on my blue star. I'm going to have that center point in that crease, and then just kind of see how the other arms of the star work around so they're about the same height above that center crease, and then the base of the star is also in that crease. You can see I've got fairly equal distance from the points to the sides of my square, so I'm going to use my iron and press the star in place. And once your star is secure, then you can go ahead and use a decorative stitch around that star. I'm going to move my spray basting supplies. Use a decorative stitch around your star. I like to use either the buttonhole stitch or the zigzag stitch. And if you choose a coordinating thread color, either a blue or a white, it will blend in slightly with your star, but also you'll still be able to see that stitch a little bit on one of the two sides. So go ahead and stitch all the way around that to help secure your applique onto your background square. I've got 2 stars made, and I did one with blue thread for the decorative stitches and one with an off-white, so you can see the difference between the two. So if you use a thread that coordinates with the background fabric, the blue that I have here, you can see that it really blends in. And if you look, you can see the stitches, but they don't stand out. You still see the star shape, but the stitches are really blending into that background. Now in this one, where I used the off-white thread, the stitches stand out on the star because they're contrasting color from the background. And so you can really see the edge of the star, and the star pops a little bit more. If you're not super comfortable with doing a zigzag stitch and staying along and following the edge of the fabric, I recommend going with the darker thread because you won't be able to see the stitches as much, and if they're not as perfect as you'd like, they won't show. If you're feeling more confident about your stitching, or you just really want it to pop, then you should consider going with the contrasting thread, the lighter color that will pop a little bit more. So make the number of star blocks that you need for whichever project layout you've chosen, and then we'll move on to our stripe blocks. Next up is joining together the strips to make our stripe block. And these are easy to sew. We're using red strips and white strips that will alternate. Before you start sewing these, I highly recommend you double check your 1/4 inch seam allowance so that you can make sure that these blocks are pieced as accurately as possible. And if you do that, you'll end up with nice straight stripes in each of those blocks, and it'll really make your finished product look nice. So the way you can test your seam allowance is to cut 2 2-inch squares and sew them together, press them open and measure. And if the width of those 2-inch squares together is 3.5 inches, then you're set. You've got a great 1/4 inch seam allowance and you can move on to your blocks. If the width is less than 3.5 or more than 3.5, your 1/4 inch seam allowance is either a little big or a little small. And so what you want to do is try that a couple more times so you can really get it dialed in and have an accurate 1/4 inch seam allowance. And once you do that, we can work on the stripes. So the stripe block is pretty easy, like I said. You're going to lay out a red strip, and then a white strip, a red, a white, a red, and a white. Now, if you've watched any of these sit and sew videos, you'll know that I'm a big proponent of chain piecing, and these blocks are a great opportunity for doing that rather than sewing these two together, then adding a third, a fourth, a fifth, and a sixth. So what I recommend is to put these strips together in pairs, just like this. And you want to make sure, because these are pre-cut to size, you want to make sure that the ends of them and the long edges are matched up nicely. And then what I'm going to do is take all 3 of these over to my machine and just sew with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, leave my foot down, tuck the next one underneath, and just start sewing there, and do the same with the third. And then I'll have 3 red and white pairs, and we'll talk about joining those. So I've got my pairs here, and I'm going to press each set of pairs open. I'm going to press my seam allowance toward the darker fabric, so toward my red. And some people prefer to get all of the strips sewn together and then do all of the pressing at once. And you can absolutely do it that way as well. And then, okay, now that all 3 are done, I'm going to join these. I'm going to lay them out in the correct order again. Red, white, red, white, red, white. And I'm going to flip this one over and turn it. I'm going to match up this long edge as well as the short edge, and then stitch down and add these 2 together. Then I'm going to put the last pair on as well. I've got my strips sewn together. I'm going to continue pressing here, and I'm going to do like before and press toward my darker fabric. There we go. And like I said, the more consistent your 1/4 inch seam is, the straighter all of your stripes will be. So there's my block. And then what you can do is take a 6.5 inch square ruler and check it out. And it should be pretty close to 6.5 all the way around. If it's a little smaller, but within like an 1/8 inch, you're fine because you can make that work with your seam allowance. If it is significantly smaller, like say by 1/4 inch, you may want to go back and check and see if any of your seams are a little wider than they need to be, because the closer to 6.5 inches square these blocks are, the better. So we've got our star blocks and we've got our stripe blocks. And what you need to do is make the number you need for each of these types of blocks for putting together either the wall hanging, the placemats, or the table runner. And I'm going to show you how to assemble all three. You've got your blocks all done, and now it's time to talk assembly. I cleared off some space on my design wall so I could show you all three of the different layouts that this kit makes. Now, just a reminder, I have enough blocks here to show you all three because I made more for the sample. With your kit, you'll need to choose between if you're going to make the wall hanging, some placemats, or the runner, or some combination of each, but you do not have enough blocks to make all three projects. We just offer 3 different layout options for you to choose from, so you can make the project that works best for your house. So if we look over here, we've got the table runner, and it is 4 stripe blocks and 3 star blocks that just get laid out in a simple row. 2 things you want to pay attention to here. First of all, make sure that with your stripe blocks, you've got the outer red stripe on the same side for all 4 blocks. If you turn it this way, you won't have that continuing stripe all the way down. So double check the position of your stripe blocks. And then for the stars, if you want to, you can pay attention to make sure that all of the stars are oriented the same way. You can see mine all have a point with sort of a left lean to them, and I purposely position them all in the same direction. So for the table runner, you'll sew those 7 blocks together, and your table runner top will be complete. Then if we look at the little square quilt, the wall hanging or table topper as well, it uses 5 star blocks and 4 stripe blocks. Same 2 things to keep in mind. Look at the position of your stars, and then look at the position of the stripes in your stripe blocks so that they're all headed the same direction, and then you get that continuity of the stripes. So when you go to assemble this, you're going to sew your blocks into horizontal rows and then join the rows to make this square. And placemats are the same thing as our square topper up here. It's just 6 blocks instead of 9. So you've got 3 star blocks and you've got 3 stripe blocks. And same thing, keep an eye on the position of your stars. And actually I'm gonna flip this one around, and for these I've got all the star point pointing up, and then keep an eye on the position of your outside red stripe. So same thing, sew these into rows and then join the rows together. For both of these projects, when you're pressing the seams, for one row you want to press the seams to the left, and for the next row to the right and then left. Alternately, you could press the seams out and then in and then out. The key is just that you want your seams to nest so that when you join the rows, it's very easy for these joins to match up nicely. So choose your layout and then sew your blocks together, and then we'll talk about quilting and binding. So I've got my tops assembled and I've got them layered with batting and backing. Got the placemat, the long table runner, and the wall hanging. So the next step is to quilt these. You can do either straight line quilting or do some echo quilting around the lines of the stripes and the stars, or even just a crosshatch, something like that. But get your project quilted, and then you'll trim the batting and backing even with the edge of your quilt, and then put your binding on, and your project will be finished.